Today we're talking about RRSPs versus TFSAs and which one would be better for you and your situation. If you haven't done so already, please check out our previous videos that go into detail of explaining how RRSPs and TFSAs work. Once you do so, then come back and we'll talk about what's best for you and your situation. First off, which is better? Well, as with most things in life, it depends. There are no right answers, universal truths. It depends on you and your situation. And really, in my opinion, there is no wrong answer. If you're putting money into investments, whether it's RRSPs or TFSAs, you're already ahead of most people. So don't stress too much about it. We'll give you some insight onto the different things you should be looking into when making that decision for yourself. First thing you want to look at is your contribution room. So both have a limited room you can put into. So you just want to make sure that you have the room available to make whatever contribution you want to make. That shouldn't be a problem for most people, but just double check before you put the money in the account. Next thing you want to think of is, what is the purpose of this investment? Is this for long-term investment purposes, such as retirement, or is this more short or medium term, maybe saving up for renovations or a trip or a new car or whatever it might be, right? Both long-term and short-term goals have different strategies attached to them. So if you are investing for the long term, for retirement, both the TFSAs and the RRSPs would be good options for you. Especially the RRSPs, it's right in that name, Registered Retirement Savings Plan. It's meant for long-term investments. But TFSAs can work very well for that as well. Now, if it's for short-term goals or medium-term goals, then RRSPs might not be as attractive to you. You might want to be thinking about putting the money in a TFSA. Why is that? Well, as we explained in the other video, TFSAs are completely tax-free. So when you pull the money out in a year, 2, 5, whatever it might be, there is no tax consequences. Versus if it's an RRSP, you're going to be losing a part of that to taxes, and you're going to have less left over to use in whatever you've been saving up for. And depending on your situation, it could lead to unintended tax consequences. So you want to really make sure you take that into consideration. On top of that, when you have money in a TFSA, when you pull the money out, that becomes extra contribution room for you in the following year. So you don't lose that. Versus RRSP, when you pull the money out of the RRSP, then it becomes, lost room. You're not going to get that back. You can earn it again with your earned income, but you're not going to get the extra room for the RRSPs that you pulled out. Okay. Of course, there are exceptions for the home buyers plan and lifelong learnings plan, but those are beyond the scope of today's video, and we'll go over that in a future video. The next thing you want to really consider is your tax rate and the tax impact of making those investments. And more specifically, the tax rate now versus the tax rate when you're going to be taking the money out of the investment account, right? So if you remember, TFSAs have no tax impact whatsoever. However, RRSPs give you a tax deduction on your current year return. So it'll save you at whatever rate you are right now. So the higher your tax bracket is, the more attractive the RRSP option is. And conversely, the lower your tax rate, the less attractive the RRSP option is. You also, like I said, want to take into consideration the tax rate when you pull the money out, because the biggest benefit you can get with, for example, an RRSP is making the contribution when you're at a high tax rate, but then pulling it out when you're at a much lower tax rate. And that spread between the two, that larger that is, the more attractive that RRSP option is. Now, the problem is we don't have a crystal ball, so you might not know exactly what your tax rate is going to be when you pull the money out, but you're going to have to use best guess on that. And there's no right or wrong answer, again, depending on what tax bracket. There's no hard cutoff in my mind in terms of, once you hit a certain bracket, it's better to do RRSPs versus TFSAs. It's all about kind of where you are now versus where you think you're going to be when you pull the money out, and how long-term that period is. Because the longer it is, the more benefit you get from the deferral of taxes you receive from an RRSP contribution. Okay? One thing that isn't talked about a lot, I find, is that you want to look at not only your income tax bracket that you're in, but there's also other things to take in consideration that affect your taxes. A classic example of that is the CCB, the Canada Child Benefit. So I'll give you an example. I pulled up a client of ours. They're a couple with 3 kids earning about $70,000 in total, and most of that is earned by the one spouse, while the other is at home with taking care of the kids. So at $70,000, the marginal tax rate that they're at is about a third, 33.25%. Okay, but based on that level of income, they're getting Canada Child Benefit. And if they make a $1,000 RRSP contribution, you might just think, well, it saves them 33.25%, right? So $332.50 for every $1,000 of RRSPs they make, but you'd be wrong. When we actually put a $1,000 RRSP contribution, it saves them a little over 53%. And that's because they're saving on the taxes, but they're also getting another almost 20% extra savings with getting extra Canada Child Benefit because of the reduced income that's showing up on the return, right? So for someone in their situation, RSPs might be a lot more beneficial than they first think if they were just to look at their tax rate. So something to really important to consider, and you might not have all the information, which is why it's always important to consult with a tax professional so they can give you kind of the big picture of, what are all these impacts of putting RSPs or money into RSPs versus not doing that and putting money into a TFSA. Okay. The last thing that I think people should really consider is how disciplined of a person or investor that you are. And again, this isn't really talked about very much, but the biggest benefit you get from an RSP is that immediate tax savings that you get for making that deduction and saving it on your personal return, right? If you're very disciplined and you would take that money and reinvest it either in RRSPs or TFSAs, then great. You're maximizing the benefit of the RSPs by taking those savings and reinvesting it. And that'll allow you to grow that investment a lot quicker. But if you're like most people, you'll take that refund and spend it on something, right? And if you're not disciplined, then you're losing out a lot on that benefit that the RSPs get you, which is why I really like TFSAs for a lot of people, because it's kind of like a forced savings, right? You don't get the benefit today, you have to pay the tax on the amount, and the leftover after-tax amount is invested, but then you're not gonna be paying tax when you take the money out later on, so you're forced to pay taxes now and saving you that benefit later on, right? So that's another thing I wanna look at. So just to summarize, things you wanna consider is your contribution room, whether your goals are long-term versus short-term, your tax rate now versus when you're going to pull the money out, keeping in mind other things such as the Canada Child Benefit if you fit into that pool of people who qualify for that, and then your discipline in terms of what you're going to be doing with that refund from the RSP if you made that RSP contribution. Okay, so that kind of summarizes things you want to look at. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment below and we'll do our best to answer. Thank you again for watching.